Sorry. Minor technical difficulty. Wedding garments. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. Again, talking about wedding garments. Jesus was ever being challenged by the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the whomever. Even the Herodians saw fit to present themselves in a challenging manner to Jesus. Like they could somehow make him stumble in his thinking or his teaching. If they could somehow trip him up, get him to contradict himself, contradict the word, contradict the Bible, or not the Bible, but to contradict the teachings, his own teachings, to come against. But here in chapter 22, I'm going to read verses 1 through 13. And I'm going to read from the King James Version. Matthew chapter 22. And Jesus answered and said, and spake unto them again by parables, and said, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and that they should not, and they would not come. Again he sent forth other servants, saying, tell them which are bidden, behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fatlings are killed, and all the things are ready. Come unto the marriage. But they made light of it, and went their own way, one to his farm, and another to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servants, and entreated them spitefully, and slew them. But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth. And he sent forth his armies, and destroyed the murderers, and burned up their city. Then said he to his servants, the wedding is ready, but they which are bidden were not worthy. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid to the marriage. So those servants went out and into the highways, and gathered together all as many as they found, both good and bad. And the wedding was furnished with guests. When the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not a wedding garment. And he saith unto him, friend, how comest thou hither, not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. And the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into the outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Amen. Our whole time talking about the clothes and the garments that we wear, that God adorns us with, it comes from Isaiah chapter 61 verse 10, where he talks about, I will greatly rejoice because God has clothed me with garments of salvation, with the robe of righteousness. How God clothes us, how he just embraces us. We are adorned. He goes on in Isaiah to say that how he's decked as a bridegroom, adorns himself as the bride covers herself with her jewels. We're covered in God's righteousness. We're clothed with his righteousness. Salvation, as believers, our salvation is as fine garments. And then we talked last week about how Jesus, they even tried to take his garments from him. Well, they did take his garments from him, but they gave them back. after they mocked him, after they beat him, after they made fun of him, after they spat upon him, then they put his garments back on him, and then they delivered him unto crucifixion. And after that, after they delivered him unto crucifixion, then they took his clothes away again, and they divided his clothes among themselves. But his outer garment, his robe, was of one piece, and they couldn't divide that. They didn't divide that. They cast lots for that to see who would get it. After having just made fun of him, after having just mocked him, now his vestiges, his clothes, his garments, now they are of value. The irony of it all. But here we have Jesus talking about the parable of a marriage feast, where the king has sent forth his servants to invite the people to the marriage that he has made for his son. And the people rejected the offer. Made light of it. Made light of it by not taking it seriously. Made light of it by not accepting it. And it says many went, they just left. They said, nope, nah, no thanks. We choose not to go. It says one went to his farm and another to his possessions. So one, his occupation distracted him. Another one, his possessions distracted him from accepting the king's invitation to the wedding. The king has invited. The king. That by itself would say, this is a special event. There's going to be some nice stuff at this event. My mindset is, boy, there's going to be some good food there. Because it's the king. You know he about to throw down. They about to throw down for the king. So I got to get there. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be that. That's just me. That's just me. But it says they went. One to his farm and another to his possessions. And then in verse 6, it says the remnant, they took his servants, the remnant, the ones that are left, the ones that remain. See, the remnant usually is a faithful few. That's what we think of the remnant. When I think of the remnant, it's always the faithful few. But it's those who are left, those who remain. Of those after everybody else is gone, the remnant. So the remnant took the servants and entreated them spitefully and slew them. So when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and he sent forth armies and destroyed the murderers and burned up their city. And he said, okay, so the ones whom I originally invited weren't worthy. Not dealing with them anymore. So now go out and whomever you see, who you find, invite them in. Invite them in. I don't care. Yeah, I don't care. Even in one he says, and they invited them out, all whom they could find, says the good and the bad. Interesting. But in the commentary, it says when it talks about the good and the bad, they were all bad, if you will. But the good and the bad says those who are morally bad and those who are immorally bad. Yeah, there's a difference. But so anybody and everybody was invited in. But as was tradition in that time, when the king invited people to the wedding, he also provided wedding garb. He also provided clothes for them to wear. Number one, so that they would be adorned in a manner that pleased him for his event, for the event of the wedding of his son. Number two, if you're in there and you had a wedding garment on, that means that you had accepted the king's invitation. So when he walks in and he sees everybody adorned in the clothes that he handed out, okay, all right, no party crashers. It's all good. All of these have accepted my invitation. All of these have received. All of these have said, yes, I will come. And I will come on your terms, and I will eat of your food, and I will partake of the festivities. And in verse 11 here, it says that when the king came to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. The audacity of a person. The king, no less, has invited you to his event. Tradition states that the king is going to hand out garb, and it doesn't say for sure whether the servants, when they went out to invite the people, whomever, that they took garments with them, and if the person said, I will go, they said, okay, I will hand you a garment. Or if they invited them and then the people showed up and they got a garment at the door. But one way or another, if you were in there, you were expected to have on the garb. You were expected to have on the wedding garment. Because the wedding garment gave you the right to partake of everything that was in there. Anything that was in there gave you the right. The garment, you receiving the king's garment, gave you the right to participate. The right to be a guest. An honored guest. So here we have a man in there, in the midst, who chose not to. Verse 12. And he saith unto him, Friend, how comest thou hither, not having a wedding garment? Interesting that the king calls him friend. Not infidel. Not, hey, you party crasher. Anything other out of his name, nothing derogatory, nothing slanderous, nothing imprecatory, nothing like that. He's like, hey, friend, why is it that you're in here and you don't have a garment? What's up with that? The man had no answer. Because there's no excuse. You could what could you possibly say as to number one, knowing in the time the tradition stated that this was how things went. So the king is going, and he's going by the tradition, the expectation that was placed upon every person, even the expectation that was placed upon him, because the expectation was that the king would provide the garments. So he did his part. He provided the garment. The man had an opportunity to receive the garment. Had the man not had opportunity to receive the garment, then the king wouldn't have held him to the level of accountability that he held him to. Because the king knows that I sent my servants out to give the invitation. And as a part of receiving the invitation, you would receive the wedding garment. Whether you got it in the fields or wherever they met you, or whether you came to the door and they handed it to you, he had ample opportunity to receive the garment. Not just receive it, but put it on. Because he could have received it out there in the street, but he never put it on. Never put it on. And he's in the party trying to blend in. Where everybody else is garbed out and he's not. And he stuck out. He stuck out like a sore thumb. And because he wasn't adorned properly with the king's attire at the king's event, that he received the king's invitation. But he didn't adorn himself properly. What does that mean for us today as believers? That means that just as in all the way back in Isaiah, where the author states in chapter 61, verse 10, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in my God, for he hath clothed me with garments of salvation. He hath covered me with the robe of righteousness. This is our source of joy. This is our reason to rejoice. Simply because we're saved. Simply because God has chosen to give us, to adorn us with the clothes of salvation. And not only that, but he has covered us with his robe of righteousness. Our right standing with God. We are adorned in that. What does it mean that we are adorned? We have to think about what it means, and because God is using the example of raiment or clothes or vestiges, if you will, and he's using that example. Let's think about different situations where our clothing indicates or dictates. The old saying that the clothes make the man. You can tell what someone is prepared for by what they're wearing from head to toe. You can tell what they're prepared to do by what they're wearing, by how they are adorned, how they are attired, by what their garb is. A person going to a formal event today, you see them in a tuxedo. You'll see them in a tuxedo, very formal wear. In the military, all the different uniforms they have, you can tell where a person's going. If they've got on the ABUs or I don't know what the newest ones are called, DCUs, I don't know anymore. But you know that this is their work attire. Then they have the service dress, which is for formal military occasions. Then you have the mess dress, which is formal dining occasions. So you can tell what it is that this person is getting ready to go to if you're if you are familiar with military clothing, then you know what this person is dressed and adorned for. But see, in the spirit world, in the spiritual realm, we're identified by our clothing, by our garments. If we're clothed in God's salvation, then in the spirit, we're easily and readily identified. We're easily and readily identified. Think about if we've ever gone to an event and there was a certain style of dress, and we showed up either overdressed or underdressed. And there's a certain level of discomfort. Because why? Because we don't fit in with everybody else. We don't, not intentional, but we really can't enjoy ourselves to the fullest. If you're overdressed, you can dress down a little, come out of a piece of clothing or two to try to come down to the, I won't say come down to the level, but come to the level of expected attire. But if you're underdressed, it's hard to, you can't just primp yourself up to the next level. But there's still that discomfort that comes from not being attired like everybody else. In the spirit, our salvation makes us clothed not like everybody else. If we're adorned in God's garments of salvation and we are covered with his robe of righteousness, guess what? We're not dressed like everybody else in the world. When we go out, because the world is the place that it is, where believers are in the minority, no matter where you go in this world. Believers are in the minority. Guess what? You're not adorned like everybody else. You're going to have that discomfort of not fitting in. You're going to have that discomfort of sticking out like a sore thumb. Some people will feel overdressed for the occasion. Well, I'm being too stiff, too staunch, so they'll compromise. They'll take something off to try to fit in with everybody else, to try to look like everybody else now, when that's not what we're called to do. Some people will feel underdressed for the occasion, so they'll try to add something on to try to get up to that level of dress code that everybody else is adhering to. So they'll try to add stuff on to what God has clothed us and adorned us, wrapped us in. So we'll try to add things to that. But see, what God has clothed us in, the garments of salvation, the robe of righteousness. So we already look like a groom dressed for the wedding, decked out for the occasion. We already look like the bride who has ordained or adorned herself with fine jewels. Fine jewels. Not costume jewelry. Not zircon, the gemite. None of those things. We got the real deal. And we're dressed for God's wedding. That's what we're dressed for. That's what we're prepared for. And we can't be concerned about not fitting in, not looking like the rest of the world. We can't be concerned with the fact that our clothes don't match everyone else's around us. We can't be concerned with that. You see, there's a whole significance here. Simply, let's go all the way back to the garden when Adam and Eve, after Eve was deceived and Adam sinned, and they realized they were naked. They had to clothe themselves. They had to cover themselves. Notice Isaiah 61:10. We are covered with God's righteousness. They covered themselves with leaves. They covered themselves with their own type of righteousness, which was insufficient. It was insufficient. In their attempt to clothe themselves, they were underdressed to be in the presence of the Lord. Because even as the word says that our righteousness is as filthy rags, our righteousness is insufficient in the presence of the Lord. So after he dressed with them, after he dealt with them, he clothed them properly to be in his presence. He adorned them. So God is all about, he's all about decking us out in the spiritual. He's all about dressing us properly. He's all about that. See, as parents, we will want to make sure that our kids go out of the house looking presentable. Amen. Even when they get to the point where they dress themselves, we do that inspection to make sure everything's good. See, because even if you get all the colors right and everything, we're not going to let them go out wrinkled to where they look like a California raisin. Why? Because because it doesn't look good. It's not a good look. Clothes can be clean, but if you pull them right out of, you take them out of the dryer and just throw them, on your bed and let them sit there for a day or two, they get all wrinkly and everything. You've got on clean clothes that smell Febreze fresh. But if you put them on straight out of that pile and walk outside, you'll be a Febreze fresh California raisin just walking down the street. Wrinkles everywhere. wrinkles everywhere. They're clean. They're clean, but you're wrinkled. Wrinkled is not a good look. Wrinkled is not a good look. By the same token, you can't pull something out of your dirty clothes pile, iron it up, so that you're not wrinkled, but you smell like your clothes came out of the dirty clothes pile. Okay, you're wrinkle free, but you're dirty. You see? When God clothes us in his salvation, when he hands us those clothes, guess what? They're clean. They're wrinkle free. So when we put them on, we're prepared for whatever. We're prepared for whatever. So that's what he's expecting us to have on. That's what he's expecting us to walk around in, no matter where we're going. See, as parents, we have designated clothes. There's school clothes. There's not at school clothes. There's church clothes. There's play clothes. There's other. That's all I can think of. You know. So I've known people that had, okay, if you're going to be playing in the dirt, I got these clothes for you. If you're going to be playing in the grass, I got these clothes for you. If you're going to be playing somewhere else, I got these. So there's like all these different levels that we can come up with. See, but what God clothes us in, we're ready for all occasions. We're ready for all occasions. You see, and then see, so when our kids go out and they get their clothes dirty, okay, we gotta take them off. You know, pre-treat them, spray them with the pre-treater, put them in the washer, dish detergent. Seriously, laundry detergent. You know, put them in the machine. Let it do. Put them in the dryer sheets. Or if you put your fabric softener in the laundry washing machine, however you do it, and the clothes come out clean, and they're ready to be worn again. But see, God already took care of that. See, when our garments get stained, when we as believers stain our garments with sin, disobedience, we ask forgiveness, and God sprays that spot with what? The blood of Jesus, and it wipes away that sin, and we're again spotless. We're again without wrinkle. We're again ready for whatever, and we're dressed for it. See, God's garments allow us to go anywhere, to go wherever. And yeah, we're going to stick out like a sore thumb. We're going to stick out like a sore thumb. Because we're not going to be dressed like everybody else. And they're going to recognize that. They're going to recognize that. But guess what? It's not our problem. Our job is to invite them to the wedding. Our job is to give them opportunity to be dressed like us. That's our job. That's what's expected of us when God clothes us in that in those garments of salvation. In that when He covers us with that robe of righteousness. You see, the expectation is we'll go out trying to get everybody else to dress like us. But see, we do what a lot of teenagers do. We fall to the peer pressure. We give in to the latest fad, the latest trend. See, we're all buttoned up tight. We got on God's clothing, God's garments of salvation. He's given us His robe of righteousness. But see, when we go out, you see, the world is doing things with their clothes like sagging. And we want to fit our salvation clothes to how the world is wearing theirs, so that we fit in with them. When we should be encouraging them to dress like us, giving them opportunity. Hey, you can wear this too. You can wear this too. See, when we go out into the world, when we in the physical, we want to be an individual. We want to have an individual dress, but we want to do it like everybody else. The oxymoron of it all. We want to dress like everybody else, but we want to be an individual. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? No, it doesn't. But you have to wear this certain type of clothes. You have to wear this certain type of clothes. Your shirts have to fit a certain way. You kind of watch the trends as they come and go, and how you see things being worn a certain way and other things being worn a certain way, but you have to have a certain kind of shirt. But if you go out in public and everybody's got on the exact same shirt, then people are upset with that. But you see, we as believers, we fall into that same trap. We're clothed in what God would have us to be clothed in. Garments of salvation. A robe of righteousness. But when we step out into the world, we compromise because we want to look like them. Because we don't want to stick out. Because when you stick out, when you're different, people treat you differently. Because it's harder when you stick out. You become a target when you stick out. You become a target when you stick out. You get shunned when you stick out. Certain things happen to you when you stick out. Certain things don't happen to you when you stick out. When you buck against the trend. When you go against the fashion trend. When you go against what everybody else is doing. When you not wearing your clothes the way everybody else wears them. They're going to shun you. That doesn't change our responsibility. It doesn't change our responsibility. Because even in the account of this parable, those who were challenging Jesus were challenging him. Why? Because he stuck out. Because the way he lived, because the way he taught, because everything about him was different from everybody else. So he was being challenged. But that didn't change his mission. They didn't readily receive. They didn't readily receive. They didn't receive him. They didn't take him in. But that didn't change his mission and his purpose. His purpose was to still give them opportunity to be adorned, to be clad as we would be clad. They missed their opportunity. They missed their opportunity. Jesus stuck out like a sore thumb because he wasn't clad like everyone else. He's the original tailor. He's the designer. See, he's wearing a kingdom original. Everything we wear, what God has clothed us in, decked us out in, guess what? Kingdom original. And my salvation garments don't look exactly like your salvation garments. They don't look like your salvation garments, but they look like mine. But guess what? When the king comes in, he's going to recognize that I'm wearing salvation garments. He's going to recognize that you're wearing salvation garments. He's going to recognize that you're wearing salvation garments. And the whole thing was the guy in the parable who was thrown out, he didn't look like everybody else. And he didn't care. Because he was just trying to get in. His way. Didn't work. Unless you wear the garments and the way God has given them to us. If you want to stay in the wedding, you see, out in the world, we're going to stand out. We're going to stick out like sore thumbs because we're not dressed like everybody else. But here, among believers, where we are, the church who has gathered together to worship, We're all wearing the same thing. We're all wearing the same uniform. We're all wearing the same clothes. That's how God wants it. That's how God desires it. So when he looks and sees, when he looks out and sees, he's well pleased. He's well pleased. Our garments have purpose. Our garments have meaning. The garment of salvation. The garment of salvation. Even in the commentary where it talks about the robe, the wedding garment, it specifically mentioned that it's talking about the robe of righteousness, mentioned back in Isaiah. So from Isaiah all the way to Matthew, the importance of, in Isaiah, where Christ had not even yet come, where Christ had not even seen, experienced the cross, garments of salvation are being talked about. That's a precursor to let us know of what's coming. And then Christ himself is talking about it in a parable. The importance of the garments of salvation, being dressed for the wedding. We're dressed for a wedding. We're dressed to be received by the King. That's what we're dressed for. So when we go out into the world, remember that we're dressed for a wedding. A lot of children, when you were younger and you were dressed for church or dressed for a special event and you wanted to run outside and play, no, because that's what you weren't dressed to, you weren't dressed for that. It wasn't time for that. See, we're dressed for a wedding. And then sometimes when we go out into the world, we want to play in our wedding clothes. But God's saying, no. No. You have purpose. You have purpose. There's purpose in what you're wearing. There's purpose in the way I've dressed you. There's purpose. So remember, in the world we're going to stick out, and that's okay. We're wearing Kingdom Originals. Kingdom Originals designed for us. It's not off the rack. Personally tailored. Every single person's account of salvation, how they came to Christ, that's their garment of salvation. I can't wear yours, you can't wear mine. And no matter how much I grow in the Lord, my garment always fits. The garment always fits. And guess what? It's always in style. The leisure suit I had when I was 12 years old, if I could get it made today in my size and I wore it out in public, yeah, I would stick out like a sore thumb. And my fashion sense would be greatly questioned. Because it's out of style. Because it's not what everybody's doing today. But if you're a believer and you're clothed in the garments of salvation, as far as God is concerned, guess what? You're in style. The world's going to tell you you're out of style. The world's going to tell you those clothes don't fit in this venue. The world's going to tell you all these different things about what you're wearing. The world's going to tell you all these different things about what you're wearing. But you got to remember who clothed you. You got to remember who clothed you. And that's our word for today. Amen. Amen. Amen.